All right, good morning, you guys. Welcome to Technical Tuesday. I'm your host, Maria. Today, we're going to talk about building the need and more specifically, how to build the need for any type of prospect by asking questions, not telling them what their need is. So the thing with building the need, you guys, is there is a lot of rapport building that's involved in that. So by talking to them, asking good questions, chatting with them about, things that are important to them, we can help find out what their need is. And there's certain questions that we can ask to help kind of pull that out of them. Because if we tell them their need, that's great. Obviously, we're going to say that they need what we're selling because we're a salesperson. But if we get them to tell us why they need it, they're going to be a lot more convinced of the fact. So think about this, you guys. Have you ever been in a situation where you ask critical question one, God forbid you got sick or hurt and couldn't work for 6 weeks, 6 months or longer, how would that impact your family financially? And someone says, oh, we'd be fine. Or have you ever said critical question two, other than savings or assets, what would be your backup plan to cover all these indirect costs? And then they say something like, oh, we have a backup plan, we'd be all set. And they don't really tell you what the backup plan is. You're not really sure what's going on. We're going to talk about that today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We're going to talk about just a couple pages on the presentation and a couple additional questions that we're able to ask. Where is share screen? Oh, share content. Okay. All right, can you guys see my screen? Yes, hopefully. If you cannot see my screen, somebody speak up. I'm assuming you can.
Okay, yes, cool. We can.
Thank you. All righty, cool. So guys, I'm just going to talk about the first couple pages of the demo. So when we're talking about the stats part, you guys, we don't need to spend a ton of time on this, but we do want to get the point across that this is a real thing, this is serious, that this could happen to them, even if they're, they already shared a great story. So it's important to know exactly what it says on the page, not reading off the page. But I've seen some people say, for example, on the accident demo, here, I'll show you guys. The accident demo, it says accidents are the leading cause of death for all Americans between the ages of 1 and 44. I've heard some people say things like, between 44% of people are caused by accidents. And it's just like sort of like skewing the stats a little bit where it doesn't quite make sense. We're just kind of saying it wrong. But yeah, basically, 1 out of 3 folks are going to deal with this. Doesn't discriminate, men, women. Second leading cause of death in kids, which is awful to think about. And, some types of cancer can run in the family. And sometimes it just comes from our environment, you guys. And you can ask them, in fact, personal opinion, why do you think there's so much cancer these days? See where their head's at. It's really important to ask questions during the stats part, just to make sure they're awake, they're not falling asleep, that they're still with you. And then also to help them understand, this is all over the place. This could happen, And it's important to kind of vary your tone, your volume when you're talking about, because stats is not the most exciting topic. We're going to get through it pretty quick, but don't be monotone about it. But somewhere in here, you want to say something like, does that surprise you at all? Or like, did you know that? Americans spend $226 billion every year just on cancer. Does that surprise you at all? Yeah, no. A lot of people will say no. Why not? Or, yeah, that surprised me. Why does that surprise you? Get them to elaborate a little bit. But we're really going to dig in on this page right here, you guys, because the sales talk is great. It definitely gets the point across for the average person who we're going to demo. But some people might have a little bit more of a complicated life or story or something like that, where just critical question 1 and 2 and then moving on isn't going to quite cut it. Okay. So we're going to click on right here. There's 2 types of costs when you're dealing with cancer. Again, this is the most important page I'm going to show you. If this makes sense, the rest of it will make sense. Get them to focus here. So the first type of cost is your direct cost. That's what everyone thinks of, doctor bills, medical bills. That's what health insurance is here for. I'm guessing you probably have pretty good health insurance, right? Nodding your head. What do you have? You have Blue Cross Blue Shield, you have Anthem, like whatever's common in your area. And then dig in a little bit more. Is that through here? Is that through your spouse's job? Does that just cover you? Does that cover your spouse and kids? Find out a little bit more about their insurance. And then we're going to completely take it off the table. Awesome. I'm so glad you have really good benefits through work. I have absolutely nothing to do with that. What we do is totally different. We take care of these indirect costs. Do you know what I mean by indirect costs? Now, no matter what they say, if they say, yeah, it's like your copays and your deductibles, or if they say, no, I don't know, tell me, or if they just read off the page, or if they say, this is what your health insurance may not cover. No matter what they say, you say critical question 1 and then listen. So I always say a good way to think about your indirect costs is, you or your spouse were to get diagnosed with cancer and could not physically return to work for 6 weeks, 6 months, maybe even a year or longer, how would that impact your family financially? And then just sit back, put your finger over your mouth if you need the reminder to not talk, and sit back and listen. How would that affect you guys? And sometimes I like to add a little bit more than just, hey, if you got sick or hurt and couldn't work, I'll say, like, if you or your spouse were to get diagnosed or get hurt, or if one of your kids was in the hospital for that long, make it a little bit more real instead of just saying couldn't work. Sometimes people are going to say at this point, oh, I'd be fine if I couldn't work. I have short-term disability, I have long-term disability. And they're going to start at this point coming up with reasons why they're okay, why they don't need this. Some people, they're going to get it and be like, oh yeah, that would not be a good time, right? Not everyone's need is immediately apparent to them. It's our job to know the right questions to ask, help them discover that, and to help them discover that for themselves. So really, we're at critical question 1 right here. This is where the need building questions might start to change a little bit depending on who you're talking to. And you might need to ask more than just those 2 critical questions in the script. So many people we talk to, the 2 critical questions are going to be just fine. We're going to go through a couple different scenarios of people who might think this doesn't apply to them. Have you ever been out in the field and someone's like, oh yeah, well, my situation's a little bit different, and then they think they're special when they're really just like about a third of the other people that we talk to anyway. So it doesn't mean the script is bad or incomplete. Just think about it as like the foundation of your demo. The script is a foundation, the script is the skeleton, and then there's a couple other questions we can ask. It's kind of like putting muscles on the skeleton, kind of beefing it out a little bit. So for example, if we're talking to a business owner, when we're on this page, assuming the business owner, we're going to always assume the best of people. We're going to always assume people are more on the well-off side because they probably think they are, even though we know that cancer can crush a family financially, no matter how much money you make. You could say something like, gosh, Mr. Business Owner, God forbid you or your spouse were to get diagnosed with cancer. And, let's say it was you and you couldn't work. You couldn't physically show up and run your business for 6 months, maybe a year or longer. How would that impact your business? But more importantly, your family. And then just sit back and listen. Are they an important part of their business? Probably, because we're talking to them at their business, right? And for some business owners, maybe they're like, oh, my business would be fine, but my family, that would affect the family. You can even take the word financially out there. That's going to affect the family, right? And notice, guys, if I'm talking to someone who's married, and hopefully you can find out if they're married right around here, bring the spouse into that. Because sometimes the person you're talking to may not be the main breadwinner. And they might be thinking, well, if I couldn't work, it's not really that big of a deal. But if my spouse couldn't work, that would be bad, right? That would be pretty bad. And then if it's a business owner and he's like, well, my business would run itself, you say some questions you can ask is, hey, is there anyone else who can do your job exactly as well as you're doing it? I mean, you're a pretty important part of the business, aren't you? Because I'm talking to you here at work, right? You know, might your production decrease, but still you got people on your payroll, right? They're gonna still need to get paid, aren't they? Can you see how that might, set you back a little bit or cause a bit of a situation there? And just ask some of those questions and see if they can come to that conclusion on their own. Another good example is using a third party story. So whether you have one or you have yet to come across someone like this, you could use a third party story of a business owner and be like, I was talking to so-and-so and he told me about how when he had his stroke, he was out of work for like 6 months. And, he was used to coming into work every day and overseeing affairs, running payroll and doing all these things. And, he had to close the shop down for several weeks when this initially happened while he was getting things in order. But he's got 12 employees and they all still were expecting a paycheck. So his business took a huge hit when he was going through that. Might that also be the case if, God forbid, something were to happen for you? And then that might get him to think about it, because obviously folks aren't thinking about this stuff, right? We're hoping it doesn't happen. Scenario 2 on this page, let's say it's like an older person. They're like, oh, I'd be fine. I'm just working for fun. I'm basically retired anyway. I've got my pension. I'm on a fixed income. I'm okay. Then you'd want to say something like, awesome. I am so glad. Sounds like you probably made a lot of really smart financial decisions to get where you are today, right? Shaking your head. Yeah, they're awesome. Tell them how awesome they are. So what expenses at home does your Social Security cover? Because that's what we're asking. We're saying, what bills do you still have? Their Social Security is going to something, right? They're spending their money on something. Okay, gotcha. So your Social Security is going to cover, your house payment and your taxes and utilities, and that's all you have. Okay, cool. Well, hey, if you were, God forbid, you were in that situation, going through cancer, not able to draw an income from here, exactly what your Social Security is bringing in for you. Can you see how if you're going through something serious like cancer, you might have additional expenses, right? Can you see how perhaps your Social Security could get stretched pretty thin in that situation? And just see what they say to that. See if they're open-minded to that. And then think about if it's an older person, if they've got kids. Some folks are like, oh, my kids would help me out. It's like, I'm so happy you have a supportive family. That's really a blessing. But you'd probably feel pretty bad being a financial burden on your kids, right? And, obviously they love you and they want to help you out. But wouldn't you rather not have to completely rely on them financially if you didn't have to? And some of the stuff, you guys, it's the tone you use when you ask. It's how you ask. We're not fencing with people. We're not being accusatory. We're asking these questions with empathy and feeling and just really trying to see if this is something that would make sense for them potentially. And if you guys can think of any other scenarios of a person you can think of recently who you were demoing and the demo kind of fell apart right here. Does anybody, I'm going to pause real quick. Does anybody have a situation they came across recently where they're like, dang, the critical questions didn't work and I don't really know how to handle that? Has anyone had that happen recently? Is there any situation you'd like to present to me where I can see if there's any questions that I could ask them to help out?
Well, this one I typically run into, Maria, is when they're just really not engaged and they're just giving you like, yeah, and
when they want to answer questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a fun time. Yeah, when you say like, how would that impact you financially? And they're like, right. Okay, I see where you're going. Then they're just like not engaged. So sometimes I'll just look them in the eye and I won't say anything until they answer me. Or sometimes if I can tell they're really not with me and they're not engaged, like, hey, are you with me? Is this making sense to you? And sometimes they need a little more ice breaking. They need to trust you a little bit more. Or sometimes we need to just kind of, I'm really bad at knowing when they're not a prospect, when they're, a suspect and not a prospect. So I usually try and power through a demo if I've already gotten a demo, which I need to get better at discerning when it's time to walk away. But, sometimes just looking at them in the eye and asking that question again, like, yeah, so how would that affect you personally? How would that affect your family? And just looking at them dead in the eye, like, serious, like, I'm talking to you, man. And then see, sometimes that works because they're at first just like, oh yeah, she's showing me a thing. It's like, no, I'm talking to you. And sometimes that gets through to them. And then sometimes you just kind of gotta say, hey, are you awake in there? You know? So I don't know if that helps at all, but yeah, I've run into that a lot too. Real quick, does anybody else have any other, like, besides a business owner or an older person, does anyone have a scenario they've run into where the indirect costs and those questions seem to not really work out?
I had a situation. Yet somebody else go. All right.
Somebody go ahead.
All right, I'm here. I got it.
You're up, Adam.
All right, deal. I had a situation yesterday. It was not a business owner. He was a guy. He was an employee, but he, everything I tried to ask him, even when I got to like mentioning peace of mind, he's like, "I've always got peace of mind." But to rewind to the beginning, yeah, in the critical questions, he's like, "Oh no, I'd be good." As far as like asking that, that second, he's like, "Yeah, I'd be good. I'd be good. I got money." And so one thing I said to him that at least made him interested to hear the rest at that point was, I was like, "Okay, that's great. If I could show you something that would allow you to not spend that money and spend somebody else's money, spend money that's not what you've saved up, and would give you the money back if you didn't have to get in that situation, would you be interested in hearing that out?" And he was like, "Okay, yeah." Of course, then it got to the peace of mind where he's like, "I've always got, I'm perfect." And,
yeah, right. Well,
yeah.
Great job on that, Adam. Like, seriously, that's a great way to get someone re-engaged. If at any point they're kind of like, you're like, hey, if I could show you something that pays you cash when bad stuff happens, so you don't have to spend your money and it gets refunded if you don't have to use it, is that something you'd be open-minded at taking a look at? And that's awesome, Adam. That's really smart. So that's a great way to kind of pique someone's interest. And yeah, I've run into that too, where somebody's just kind of like, oh yeah, I don't worry about stuff. I don't think about stuff. And so I kind of circle back around and just ask the question. I'm like, yeah, I know it's not a fun topic, but now that you're thinking about it, what would be your backup plan? Now that you're thinking about it, how would that affect your family? A lot of people say like, oh, I like to be positive, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to think about this stuff. And you kind of got to just acknowledge their objection and then ask the question again. Was someone else trying to say something too? Or was I making that up?
Maria, I was just saying, it's never too soon to share a testimonial. If you see that the person is not with you, see if a testimonial will engage them and just ask them, hey, first, do you think they ever planned on that happening? Of course not, right? Now, if that same scenario happened to you, might that cause some extra stress and strain here at your business or at home? Can you see how having an extra $20,000, $40,000 in your checking account during that time help out? That's what this is. So
that's smart. That's smart, Zach. Because a lot of times we wait to share a testimonial till like 4 pages later. So that's smart. It's never too soon to share a testimonial. Yeah. That's awesome.
Maria, I'll be brief on throwing this out there, but sometimes when you get that person that says, I'm good, that's the person that thinks I've got things covered. I've got $5,000 of cash in my savings. I'd be good, and that's exactly, and we all know that they wouldn't be good, but it doesn't matter what we know. It matters what they know and what they believe. So that is a good time where, like Zach said, bringing up a third party testimonial, speaking to people through that person. It's just like this happened, and that really makes a lot of sense when you think about it, doesn't it? Or sharing that affluent person testimonial that I shared with everybody, with you guys on Agency Day, about Paul Best, who owns East Coast Towing, very well off, done very well, didn't get that way by having his business handed to him or winning the lottery, but making a lot of little smart decisions, and a policy that pays you an unlimited amount of cash if something happens and gives you your money back if nothing happens is just a smart little decision. Because I could reach in my own pocket and spend my own savings to take care of something like this, but why the heck would I do that? I can spend your company's money and protect mine. That just makes sense. And then you can always step out of the role play and say, and you know, Mr. Business Owner who thinks he's wealthy, that really makes a lot of sense when you think about it, doesn't it?
Very good. Yeah, and and I hope everybody has that testimonial that Van shared on Agency Day. That's a good example of a third party story, you know, whether they know Paul Best or not, you know, replace that with the name of somebody in Roanoke or somebody in your turf or whatever, and use that instead. So that's really smart. All right, guys, I'm going to move on to the next page. So the indirect costs. So think about this. Have you ever gotten, you know, when you say, you know, how would that impact you financially? What bills do you have? Have you ever heard someone say, I don't have any bills? It's usually somebody who's a little bit older or somebody who paid off their house. Awesome. That's great. I'm really happy that they paid off their house. However, everybody has bills. And that's just a funny thing people say. So this page, we need to ask, not tell. We're not just pressing buttons and telling them these are your indirect costs. We're pressing buttons and saying, do you have this? Do you have this? Wow, okay, you do have bills, right? So lost income and savings. I say, you know, hey, do you have short-term disability here? If they haven't mentioned it, no. Oh, you do? What is that, like 60%, something like that? Okay, you're not sure? Yeah, normally disability is 60% and then it's taxed. So it's close, it's about 50% when it's all said and done, kicks in after about 2 weeks. So chances are if you were out for 6 months and you didn't start getting paid your 50% until you're 2 weeks in, you'd probably be losing a little bit of income, wouldn't you? And a lot of folks in this situation, can you see how they're having to dip into their savings at this point? And if you were in that situation, you know, even God forbid, let's say your wife was sick, you'd probably want to take some time off and be there for her and help her out, go to the hospital and visit her. And is your disability going to pay you if your wife is sick? No, it's not. Your living expenses. I know you said you don't have any bills. I'm guessing you meant you paid your house off. Your house is all paid off. Awesome. You still have taxes though, don't you? Yeah, those never go away, do they? Utilities, you still have those? Yeah. Do you have a car payment? No car payment. Good for you. So you still have, you know, put gas in your car, you know, car insurance, repairs, groceries. Everybody's got to eat, right? And then with your insurance, I know you said you've got really, really good insurance, but you still have a copay and deductible, right? Like most folks. Cancer. I've been recording, haven't I? Weird. Okay. Anyway, and then you could say, you know, and if you're going through something major like cancer, sometimes there's a specialty copay. There's an additional expense that you have to pay every time you get chemo. Do you know what your insurance covers for that? Probably not, because I've never gone through it. And then finally, the out-of-pocket stuff. I mean, gosh, in the story you shared with me, you know, we're up here in Roanoke and your grandpa got treated down at Duke. You know, that's a couple hours away. I mean, if you were going through something serious like that, do you think you'd want to get treated at the local hospital, or would you want to go to wherever your doctor wanted you to go, even if it was farther away, right? And that's travel, that's hotels overnight, that's food. And who would take care of your kids while you were gone? Probably your grandparents, your parents or whatever, you know, just their grandparents, something like that. You know, just guys, sometimes I'll ask upwards of 10 questions on this page alone. Just keeping them engaged and finding out what's important to them. You know, not everybody's indirect costs are the same. Not everyone has a mortgage. You know, not everybody has childcare, but they might have, you know, they might have big expensive dogs to put in the kennel or something like that. And we got to help just as soon as you talk to enough people and ask them which indirect costs would affect them the most, we're going to start to learn some of the different scenarios of people that we might run into. And, you know, you could say something like, hey, in your situation, you know, with you being the main breadwinner of your household, your spouse works, you've got 3 kids in sports and stuff like that in school, which one of these indirect costs would affect your family the most? Why do you say that one? When do you think most people find out just how big their indirect costs can be? And I put emphasis on most people because, again, the average person we talk to, they think they're financially okay. They're doing all right. So you don't want to make it sound like you're asking them a dumb question. Just say, hey, I know you know this, but when do you think most people find out how big their indirect costs can be. It just, to them, it's sometimes perceived as a little bit more of a respectful way to ask. And then for critical question 2, you know, I guess, God forbid this were to happen, you know, a month from now, what would be your backup plan today to take care of all these indirect costs other than having to dip into savings or sell your assets? And then sometimes we even come on this page and say, hey, other than dipping into your savings or selling your property, your personal items, gosh, what's your backup plan to cover all of those expenses we just talked about? And then whatever they say, if they're like, oh, savings, or I've got stocks, I've got a retirement account, or whatever they say, you know, my rental properties, you know, well, hey, that's your savings. That's really not your backup for cancer, right? I'm guessing you probably have something better to do with that money, don't you? You probably weren't planning on using it all to pay for a heart attack or an accident, right? Yeah, that's what everybody says. And that's what this is for. So if you think about it, you guys, you know, sometimes we're asking questions a couple times. So let's say they say their savings is like, oh, I use my savings. I'm good. I've got savings. I've got money. It's like, well, hey, you're doing better than most Americans. The fact that you even have savings, you know, you've probably been saving for a while. How long do you think you've been saving for? Oh, I've been saving all my life. Yeah. Wow. You've been saving all your life. I'm guessing you probably, like most folks, you would rather not lose your life savings just because you got sick, right? Right. So other than your savings, what would be your backup plan a month from now if that happened? And sometimes it's just asking the same questions again, because maybe they didn't hear you right the first time. And guys, this is sometimes a little bit awkward, a little hard. You know, you may have heard the term CPR, cut, pour, and remedy. So it sounds kind of gnarly, I guess, but it's thinking about like cutting a wound and pouring salt in it and then remedying it. So this is the cut, pour part. These 3 pages, this is the cut, pour, remedy. You know, we're making it uncomfortable for them. We're making it real for them. Because if they don't think it's a real thing, if they don't think this is a real problem that they could have, then why the heck would they buy your product if they don't think it applies to them? And then the remedy is when we come in here, we're like, that's exactly what this is for. That's why I'm here. Ooh, this is bad. You have a problem. I'm here to fix it. And that's kind of where we come in, right? And another thing you can say right here is, you know, that's exactly why I'm here. Pull up your names list. That's exactly what all of these people are working with us. That's exactly why we have all these clients right here in the area. Bring up names if you've showed names before that they might know. And then one last thing you guys can do, let's say you work really hard to build the need here, you keep going, you read a testimonial, you're about to do your buying atmosphere, and you're still feeling a little shaky about that at this point, right before you do your buying atmosphere. You know, maybe they're like that person that someone mentioned earlier who's kind of not really engaged still, and they're just kind of like barely answering your questions. And you're like, listen, is this going to be a solid demo, or is this person wasting my time? You can say, hey, Mr. Prospect, listen, I know you like to think positive, and we all hope and pray that nothing bad ever happens, right? But just the fact that 1 out of 3 folks are going to deal with cancer in their lifetime, is it possible that you or your family could be affected by this at some point? Obviously, we hope and pray it doesn't happen, but is it possible? Yeah. And if something like that did happen, and you guys, your life was flipped upside down for 6 months to a year, traveling all over the place, missing work, paying medical bills, might that put just a little extra financial stress and strain on your family? Yeah, it would for most folks, right? And gosh, do you have a backup plan right now that would take care of that? No? Okay, well, hey, it sounds like there's a need for something, Mr. Prospect. And honestly, I don't know for a fact if what I have is going to be the right fit to solve your problem. I mean, there were all these other people that I talked to that did have that problem, showing the names list. All these other people had that same problem that you have, and now they don't have that problem anymore. And I don't know if this will be the right fit for you, but I'll run you through it and then just kind of go do your buying atmosphere. That's kind of your last ditch effort to just kind of build the need before the buying atmosphere. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. That was pretty much what I have for you guys on building the need. I know we're kind of up against the clock here, but does anybody have any questions about any of that? Anything to add? Any comments? Anything like that?
Maria, I thought that was awesome. You did an awesome job. And I would say, don't be scared to dig in like Maria did. Right?
I think we're losing Zach.
I'd rather do that on the front end to make sure you're dealing with a real problem with you. Don't make that mistake. I've made it enough for everybody. So dig in and don't be scared. Oh, sorry.
Jeez, poor Zach. It's self-service out there. I feel you. All
Yeah,
right.
guys, I'll just throw in that this is next level. If you're just out there just saying words to say words, you can be what they call, you're being a demo dummy. Just going out and just saying words to say words. When you truly understand that your words have meaning and what you're trying to accomplish, you're trying to open that person's mind, and you're doing it in a way that doesn't get them defensive. So you're not talking directly to them, but always think, how can I third party this? How can I share a testimonial of someone that's not here? How can I share a story of someone in the community that people know that can build trust, and then circle back around after telling that story through that person and saying, you know, Maria, that really, when you think about what Paul Best said, I mean, well-known member of the community that bought this because he's a pretty smart guy. When you think about it, that really makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah, it lands different, guys. Okay, and they're never going to stop and tell you, well, since Paul Best, who's doing really well financially, owns all those tow trucks, or name a person in your territory that's well known, that has a business that, well, since they do, they're never going to say that. Well, since they're doing it, I'm going to be open-minded to it. And sure, I'll buy this. But that's what's going on in their brain. So start thinking through this and start becoming, start moving away from demo dummy and try to start understanding what you're trying to accomplish and the psychology of all of it. Pick up a book on sales. There's some great books out there too on the psychology of the sale, and become a student of the game, because sales is a wonderful and fascinating profession that we've all chosen to be a part of.
Thank you for that, Van. All right, guys, if you have any other questions, feel free to post them on Voxer and I will get back to you. And go out there and have an awesome Tuesday. We'll see you tomorrow morning. Bye-bye.
Great material, Maria.
Thank you.